Hey, what's the beat?
You tell me, girl. I try to avoid the news as much as I can. Hypocrisy and fear-mongering, all of it. I could use some help, though.
Hello, greater YouTube area and the surrounding internet regions. This is Killer Cardinal DA7. Alright, I'm just going to come out and say it. I fucking hate Twitter. For several reasons. Here's the biggest one. It completely destroys communication, which if you're not cognizant of it, communication and the way human beings articulate thoughts and feelings and how we're able to describe in detail what we think about life and the universe, that places us higher up the food chain than animals who mostly follow instinct to their basic needs and simplest pleasures. Twitter forces people to truncate their thoughts into 140 character bits and pieces. Some people try to get around this a couple ways. One is Twit Longer, some type of attachment or app that makes Twitter provide a link to a longer version of something you're trying to say. Another is to just machine gun 20 or 30 or more tweets in a row. Honestly, if you're going to do either of those things, you may as well just get a blog. I understand that the modus operandi of Twitter is that it's supposed to be little pithy comments about things, and sometimes that can be interesting. Comedians especially make amazing use of the platform to fine-tune the punchiness of jokes, but when it comes to average civilians using it to, quote, discuss important societal issues, people end up trying to crystallize problems in the most basic possible forms, and it leaves tons of dangling tendrils unattended. But I think that's a big part of why so many people love Twitter. The way it makes everything about life seem so simple, so easy to understand. It's an electronic platform that boils down complex situations and problems with multiple dimensions, layers, factors, all of which need dwelling on to understand the full scope into 140 bleeding characters. You get to strut around like you know shit about shit all because you like and retweet little nuggets of wisdom. You scroll through Twitter and every tweet you see is a conversation ender, isn't it? Everything said on that platform is poignant. Why? Because conciseness. There's just no arguing with tweets. The fact of the matter is there's one key thing you can't do in 140 characters, and that's address both sides of an issue or make both sides feel heard. In such times as these, where division and exclusion are so popular, we desperately need people to see both sides of a story or an issue, but Twitter encourages this one-sided mentality in thousands of its users. Hashtag team this versus hashtag team that, which side are you on? And with the amount of choice people have on social media in terms of when to engage things, how intensely to do so, anytime a person feels their securities are being infringed upon, anytime they feel hurt or damaged by an argument, regardless of what side of the aisle they live on, and they just don't feel like arguing with one particular person anymore, well, they can just run away and escape from an argument whenever they feel like they aren't winning. They can just wander off and start another fight they think they can win much each. Wait, hang on. Breaking news. I'm getting handed a piece of paper by my stage manager. No, this isn't live. I wrote this all in my script days ago. Breaking news. Twitter is rolling out an update that will make tweets, wait for it, 280 characters long. Alright, yes, finally, tweets can be twice as useless as they've been all this time. This is a glorious, third time's a charm, glorious day. For your entertainment, I put a link in the description to an article from The Guardian citing Twitter users' responses to this change, most of them appearing in, you guessed it, 140 characters. I think this one's my favorite. Quote, the 280 character limit is a terrible idea. The whole beauty of Twitter is that it forces you to express your ideas concisely. Tweet 1 of 47. Actually, you know what? I'm really happy Twitter is making that change. Hopefully it'll expedite others to realize what I've known for a while now. Doubling the stupid character limit won't stop people from feeling compelled to do what they've been doing on Twitter since the beginning. Pigeonhole their thoughts on society into either the yay box or the nay box. The funniest thing to me is while people continue their daily routines of lobbing brevity-soaked artillery shells back and forth on one of the most popular verbal battlefields in the world, they often miss how an issue they're arguing about can mimic another, ironically one they may hate. In reading about racial injustice and police brutality for the video I did about Colin Kaepernick and the NFL anthem protests, I learned some things about Black Lives Matter that I didn't take into consideration when I first heard about it. For some reason, what I read reminded me of something that happened a few years ago, namely the Gamergate scandal and ensuing social media war. I realized an interesting similarity between those two groups. Both have seen a ton of hostility surround them and ultimately possess them, and that external and internal hostility caused most of their core intentions to get buried underneath the extreme voices of spectators, some of whom, while passionate about the cause, served mostly to muddle those deeper intentions. This is going to be a lot like the video I did back in April, where I linked conservatives and liberals together via a corpus callosum of intangibles and hypocrisies that never seem to be addressed or corrected. That may become something of a series for me, seeing two groups or entities in society that hate each other and finding similarities they should be meeting about. I have a blog post from years ago that I never published that I may repurpose for just that. We'll see how that comes along and how relevant it becomes to talk about. Being that it's largely gone under the radar though, I want to start by talking about Gamergate, catch people up on it if they haven't heard of it, remind some who do know about it, what we know and how it progressed, and after that go into Black Lives Matter and cap it off with how they're more similar than you might think near the end. In the description I linked a piece from knowyourmeme.com detailing the Gamergate saga from the beginning, but I'll verbally summarize it here for discussion purposes. An indie game developer by the name of Zoe Quinn created a game called Depression Quest, a free text-based simulation about what it's like to suffer from severe depression. From what I've seen of it, it functions in sort of a question and answer mechanic. Lots of reading. The simulation takes you through basic tasks like getting out of bed and making coffee, but occasionally choices change or get blocked off. Player is supposed to get frustrated, and ultimately the feelings that are evoked in a player via playing the game are supposed to mimic those of someone who is clinically depressed. I downloaded a copy on Steam, and though I haven't tried it out, it sounds like an interesting way to design a game. Very niche, very indie, simple design concept and gameplay, but poignant payoff. So Zoe's ex wrote a quote expose where he alleged Zoe to have offered sexual favors to a number of game journalists in exchange for favorable reviews for her game. When this scandal about Depression Quest broke, a lot of people online became upset at her, and questions about other gaming journalists having affairs and donating money between journalists and developers came under heavy scrutiny by YouTube analysts and bloggers, supposedly uncovering a growing web of corruption between game creators and the journalists who discuss them. Some reacted to all this with level heads and analysis, while many spectators, message boards, and commenters lashed out in the most counterproductive ways possible, hurling insults, death threats, rape threats, hacking, and mass posting of other vulgar sayings and material, inciting Zoe to team up with feminist vlogger Anita Sarkeesian, famous for gathering hundreds of thousands of dollars in Kickstarter money to produce video series about sexism and racism, and fellow indie game developer Brianna Wu, to become what would be the three iconic faces fighting against sexist online harassment. The three of them made Gamergate sound like it was nothing more than a platform for sexist loudmouths to spout hate. And to be frank, they weren't entirely wrong about that, since many people waving the Gamergate hashtag had Twitter feeds full of insulting nonsense that couldn't possibly be more hurtful to the very cause they sought to prove. That many game journalists are corrupt and misrepresent games they talk about due to bribes, behind-the-scenes deals, etc. At the very least, it exposed some of them as being focused on only shitting on Zoe, Anita, and Brianna, and far less focused on anything journalism related. Anyone who supported the journalism ethics part of Gamergate, regardless of what their Twitter feeds looked like, were buried or attacked by Zoe, Brianna, and Anita's supporters, and those three allowed it. While at the same time, anyone who brought up any real instance of sexism and or harassment or mistreatment either in the game industry or game communities or in video games themselves were also attacked by zealous Gamergaters, with no amount of Gamergaters visibly coming forward to stop that either. So if we're doing our arithmetic correctly, we have two important issues battling each other in a Rock'em Sock'em Robots level slap fight. What should have happened was a spirited series of mature, intelligent, calm discussions, and instead it devolved into a kindergarten class recess throwdown between he started it and she started it. Whether Zoe Quinn actually acted deviously by engaging in sexual relations with game journalists for positive reviews or not, the AAA game industry and game journalism in general are both proven to be rife with corruption in terms of controlling images attached to selling games. I provided links to demonstrate examples. How about the story that went around years ago that IGN, a fairly prominent online gaming news site, was offered exclusive first crack at reviews of the highly anticipated game BioShock Infinite if they put out puff pieces to positively hype up the game before release. Kinda unethical, right? There's another story about the publishers of Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor charging money to issue review copies. The publishers of the recent Doom reboot restricting review copies until the day of release, essentially preventing consumers from educating themselves on what they're buying and canceling pre-orders due to potentially negative reviews. Sega and Nintendo, two companies that used to be the go-to high-profile gaming feud before PlayStation and Xbox took over, both of those companies slam YouTube channels all the time with copyright strikes and claims that simply discuss their games unless you're on some kind of approved list of acceptable online personalities, conveniently the ones that praise and worship them and their products. I'm currently playing through Yakuza 0 on PS4, and I was going to use footage from that for this particular video. Even though my videos aren't currently monetized, I decided not to use that footage just in case. So while the aspect of sexism in the game industry in terms of how female developers or executives are treated, as well as the images of women in games, are important topics of discussion, the aspect of game journalism ethics was an important topic as well, and it needs to be addressed whether by Gamergate advocates or anyone else. Part of the problem is that at least some of the issues Anita Sarkeesian raises in her Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series on her YouTube channel, Feminist Frequency, make some small bit of sense, but they're usually enveloped by less sensible points. For instance, I don't think a character like Bayonetta, who is known for being highly sexually charged, damages the images of women in games or panders to some male gaze. There's a difference between a female character drawn in a cliché art style with unnecessarily pornographic body shape and a character oozing with personality who happens to look, quote, beautiful or sexy or whatever. Plenty of females are inspired by Bayonetta's power, independence, style, wit, and attitude to the point of cosplaying as her, and to any feminist thinking that all female cosplayers dress up just to please men or get attention, let me tell you, you may want to rethink pissing off that that community, plenty of men make that same argument, and I highly doubt many cosplayers would back down from fighting women trying to make it too. Also, I don't think we should erase every future potential instance of abuse women suffer in games themselves to further some narrative that women are perpetually victims and targets in modern times. Removing those instances from games and other media won't make women feel more secure overall, it's just restricting what kind of instances can occur in stories and art. I agree that mistreating women can be a cliche storytelling tool to grab attention going back decades in media, and we can certainly go to that well less often. Eliminating it entirely or shunning any remote instances of it as sexist seems like the opposite extreme. Despite all this, I would agree with Anita that we could use more games with more prominent females in them, preferably controllable protagonists, more variety of what women do, like why not a new GTA with a badass female main character? I'd play that in a heartbeat. More games could afford to treat women of color in a way that doesn't exoticize them to look like lunatic aliens or voodoo princesses. More games could afford to feature female characters that aren't unnecessarily sexualized and instead bring depth and unique value to either the story or the gameplay or both. I'm not saying sexy women in games can't exist. I'm saying there are some characters where it fits to have them act sexy because it goes with their backstory, history, or individual approach to the world, or the art style simply over-accentuates many both male and female characters to look ridiculous, and other characters where it makes very little sense and is only there to make them seem interesting. These things are happening more and more already, and that's great for variety, great for consumer choice, great for the industry overall. Social justice warriors aren't taking over, okay? Wider variety is a healthy thing the industry needs to grow. It brings more demographics to the table to play games. Thousands more players mean thousands more consumers, more money in the hands of developers and publishers to make even more games. It keeps the industry moving forward and not sinking into the ocean. But as I said, I do think some of Anita's arguments are too wrapped up in finding sexism where it might not be the key element. I put a link in the description to an episode of Tropes vs. Women where she discusses Crystal, a blue female cat or fox. I'm not sure what Crystal is, and I don't think Anita actually clarifies, but anyway. Crystal was originally supposed to have her own Nintendo-sponsored franchise. However, Crystal and the game she was supposed to star in were repurposed into being Star Fox Adventures on Nintendo GameCube. Crystal herself going from being a starring protagonist hero to a prisoner the male main character needs to save. Anita frames this as sexism, and while I agree that making Crystal a damsel in distress is clearly an overused trope itself, most can't really argue that part, Nintendo's overall business model and approach in the market are causing them to struggle. The Switch Portable notwithstanding, those two things definitely play into the decision. Since becoming practically the gold standard in gaming during the 8-bit era with Super Mario Bros. And Legend of Zelda, Nintendo has long been a company that leans heavily on its major franchises. Mario and Zelda obviously, but also Metroid, Mega Man, Pokemon, probably a couple others that escape me at the moment, but Star Fox is certainly on that list, even if lower on the top 10 due to many entries not living up to the charm of the original on SNES. So while one can argue that it's sexist for Nintendo to turn Crystal into a mere reward to win after finishing a stage or quest, I see it more as simply as a business decision. Being a blue cat girl didn't, under any circumstance, guarantee she would blow up and be as big as Mario, Samus, Link, Zelda, Mega Man, or Pikachu, or simply sell as well as a new Star Fox game. Meaning Crystal was simply an asset they created for one game, and when that game was scrapped because it didn't seem like it was a big enough seller, they reused that asset elsewhere to save money on development. It's faster than making a whole new character with real depth to save time by making her a trope prisoner. Easy decision creatively. I acknowledge that it seems extremely insensitive to point to Crystal and call her just graphic and sound assets, but that's how business looks at characters and creativity, and people in general, really. The prince from the original Destiny game was supposed to have a ton more character himself, and the lore in that game is alleged to have been on par with the depth of the original Mass Effect trilogy. But when Activision reworked the entire story before release, he became a subservient sibling to Queen Mara Sov. Business is never nice, it's not usually sexist on purpose. In industry, sexism seems like more of a parallel symptom than the real problem. Then again, we look to medicine and doctors to cure diseases and conditions to remove symptoms, don't we? Cancer is terrifying because there's no definitive cure. It hurts like hell and kills us far earlier than we live without it. If all cancers had no symptoms and let you live to 200 years old, provided you had no other conditions, no one would care about it. We aim to cure all cancers in the hope that it'll keep people alive longer with much higher quality. Various isms in the world are sometimes the same, especially in how big entertainment companies deal with them. Advertising and business are notorious for targeting key demographics with promotional material and products in hope of convincing them of new trends. They'll use metrics and tools to see what those demographics are saying, how they act, what they talk about, what they like, to hopefully endear themselves with that demographic's members and sell more products. It's crazy shit, but it's entirely real. I've seen it work. And if they make business decisions that come off as sexist, they'll risk it to move more units, sometimes without even acknowledging it. That's not to say the world's isms aren't to be specifically focused on and tackled head on. Saying the words racism and sexism shouldn't be equated to, quote, making a big deal out of something that doesn't exist, which I think is what ends up happening to the point of people not even admitting they occur. However, in some cases, they're tied to bigger or similar sized problems, like an overly pensive business model that focuses too heavily on franchises that sell over being more inclusive in an industry that could use more of that and growing with changing times. Like I said though, just because some of Anita's arguments and claims are a bit flawed or antagonistic, sometimes even factually untrue, that doesn't mean the bigger cause of improving the representation of women in games can't be addressed. And when many of Anita's critics step up to the plate, that doesn't tend to come up in the discussion at all. all. The intent is just to make everything she says look wrong. Some decide to criticize her by using every dirty word under the sun, and while I do encourage people to express themselves however best represents their feelings, if you really want to reach her, dropping a C-bomb, cunt to be clear, is probably pandering more to other critics of hers than it is looking for her to offer legitimate commentary on what you do. At best, she'll see you as part of the problem, not as someone trying to meet in the middle for any type of conversation to work out any of these issues. Sure, her critics can line up and talk about how she refuses to debate, refuses to sit down with people and talk on video, discuss agreeable terms and solutions that everyone is happy with, and I agree. Those refusals and denials don't welcome discussions or solutions either. They just willingly allow problems to hang in the air and not go anywhere, and hooray, everyone gets to keep fighting. I don't have any innate problem with vulgarity. I happen to enjoy vulgarity a lot of the time. However, I do reluctantly agree with Anita turning off her video's comments section since they become non-stop floods of useless insults. When scrolling through so much of it in her video's comments sections, it's hard to take people seriously who spew out nothing but vulgarity and then justify it by saying she's the one who's wrong and they're doing it for a quote good cause. Yes, harassment is technically legal most of the time, but try calling someone you know a fucking idiot whore cunt bitch and then expect them to listen to you sound off politically for 30 minutes or more. Let me know how amazingly that works out for you. It doesn't always feel good or satisfying being nice to people who look like liars, cheats, and scam artists, especially when everyone else in your personal community frames them to look that way. But sometimes you need to play the game and be respectful up front to resolve problems. And when others shit on you for it or continue to shit on you for it, it's all their fault and not yours. If you fuck that up right out of the gate, you're partially responsible. The object in those situations shouldn't be to figure out the most effective way to destroy someone or how best to assign blame. The object should be to call out where an argument goes wrong, present an opposing view, and find a peaceful way to agree. For Anita to disable her comments does, as people have said, silence and bury the people who actually plan on intelligently and maturely disagreeing without the need for vulgarity. That is true. But even when her comments were enabled and allowed, many of those people with legitimate, intelligent criticisms were so unheard among the throngs of loudmouth insults, they were all lumped together in the same collective basket. It's easy to look at Anita as the main problem there, as she likely was the one who pulled the trigger on disabling comments, but those intelligent folks should have, if they didn't actually do this, call out the problem members of that Gamergate element as part of the issue helping to break communication down. Much in the same way that when Anita or Brianna or Zoe went off the rails with an argument or claim, or unnecessarily baited or goaded people with jabs on social media or let their supporters attack Gamergaters who may not have deserved to be attacked, they willfully ignored the bigger problem of gaming journalism ethics and issued two of them dealt with as game developers. People who are on their side should also have self-regulated among their own group to encourage better representation of what everyone is standing for and point out when they were wrong about claims they make and correct themselves. Not everyone who stood beside Anita, Zoe, and Brianna were mindless SJW feminist crusaders towing some liberal agenda. Not every Gamergater was a racist, sexist, white nationalist afraid of losing their status as the kings of the jungle. There were plenty of intelligent, mature members on both sides who just wanted to discuss issues, but either they didn't spend enough time recording actual physical conversations that took place calmly, no one was having them, or just no one wanted to pay attention to those level-headed people. The ones who got all the spotlight and press were the loudmouth extremists, which only bred more loudmouth extremists, more press. The actual causes people wanted to discuss, namely sexism in games and game journalism ethics, were both largely buried and pushed aside in the name of spotlighting this ongoing battle and the nasty tweets and the harsh posts that came along with them, which only allowed more quote articles to be written to highlight those problem areas on the other side for people who are already plenty dug into their side before reading them. Oh goody, more sponsored content, more clickbait, that's just what we fucking needed. And that's the biggest part of the problem here. Gamergate started as a hashtag. There wasn't any brick and mortar Gamergate headquarters, no Gamergate investigative central hub, not a physical one anyway, not one that I know of. Anyone could use the hashtag however they liked, and when people grabbed it and harassed the living fuck out of Anita and crew in the name of gaming journalism ethics, those three performed a UFC champion level reversal. They used all that harassment momentum to their advantage and gained all the fuel they need to enhance their position. Don't get me wrong here, I'm not placing blame for the entire problem on the Gamergaters. I'm saying many of the Gamergaters utilized the worst ways of acting to solve the problem they sought to fix. They acted on impulse, on emotion. They saw more and more people on social media attack those three women, and instead of the highest profile critics of theirs looking back at their own side and saying, stop calling them names, you're not helping, they saw those women cringe in the corner and call out harassment. They gave into the hype and attacked further. Not a smart way to proceed. On the other side of things, instead of seeing the issue of game journalism ethics as a problem, Anita, Zoe, and Brianna hid behind all the harassment claims, didn't mention any problem with game journalism, allowing sites to continue their shit practices, hyping games that may or may not deserve it, likely leading to more shitty metrics and demographic targeting and likely more sexism. Neither side was helping either intention get solved. Yes, Anita received way too much money for putting together simple videos. True. And she deserved to have some of her antagonism and arguments picked apart to show where she's gone wrong, as we all deserve on YouTube and social media. True. That doesn't mean she deserved the bulk of the harassment she got, and if she deserved any at all for exactly how good or bad a person she may be, harassment sure didn't help anything get accomplished. Now, in another sector of society, we have Black Lives Matter. I was under the impression that Black Lives Matter started around the time of the Michael Brown shooting. However, after reading more about it, I learned it was started by several women a couple years before that, after George Zimmerman shot and killed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Interesting factor about my mistake there, George Zimmerman isn't white, he's Hispanic. I'll explain why that's relevant. See, a lot of the fervor that occurs on social media when Black Lives Matter comes up are from two places. Black people angry about the lack of justice for black people who were killed, mostly by police, but sometimes other sources, and white people thinking that when people say Black Lives Matter, they think it's about them, and their response is, what, white lives don't matter? Check out some of the videos from the Charlottesville situation from August. White Lives Matter is one of the actual slogans chanted by white nationalist marchers. You know what wasn't white though? Officer Geronimo Yanez, the cop who shot Philando Castile in his car after Castile admitted to having a firearm. Apparently at point blank range, it took shooting 7 times and hitting him 4 times for Yanez to feel safe. See the dash cam I linked in the description. A lot of people defend that shooting by saying Yanez was clearly panicking after shooting Castile, so obviously it was some kind of accident or not intentional, but he just shot someone 4 times. Most people would panic thinking of the impending punishment they could face when things like that happen. Of course, this past June, Officer Yanez was found not guilty, much in the same way Daniel Pantaleo was found not guilty in the Eric Garner case and Darren Wilson was found not guilty in the Michael Brown case. Seeing any degree of pattern here, cops murder black people, cops get off. Now, George Zimmerman wasn't a cop. He was a neighborhood watch coordinator in a gated community, so not 100% the same. I'll admit I didn't realize he was Hispanic, but the name Yanez doesn't sound white, and Yanez is a big part of what made me realize, and that Zimmerman accentuates, Black Lives Matter isn't a group that's centered around diminishing white people. Black Lives Matter is a group built to spotlight the struggles black people go through and helps fight for justice when the courts that should be bringing it aren't. It says so on BlackLivesMatter.com's About page. Quote, "The Black Lives Matter Global Network is a chapter-based, member-led organization whose mission is to build local power and to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes. We are working for a world where black lives are no longer systematically targeted for demise." Unquote. It says so right there. It's not intended to be about white people. Yet I think one of the struggles the Black Lives Matter hashtag goes through, unfortunately, is grammar. Most people know the typical style of taking a problem, extracting one bit of that problem, adding gate to the end, and voila, you have a scandal title, right? Adam Baldwin for some reason did it with Gamergate. I have no idea why Adam Baldwin felt like commenting on video games, but he's credited with coining the name Gamergate. But Black Lives Matter isn't just a catchy name someone threw together by mashing up 2 words. It's a simple sentence, an idea, a feeling, a sentiment. And ideas, sentences, thoughts, and sentiments can occasionally have implications. They're evocative. Practical example of why this causes some unrest and why that unrest doesn't entirely make sense. Ever hear a friend say, "I am so ugly"? Most people will respond to their friend, "Nah, come on, you look good." Self-deprecation is used sometimes to evoke a response from others, generally positive responses. I don't need to be a psychologist or have a wall of degrees to know that. That's what typically happens. You've seen it happen yourself. Someone self-deprecates, friends usually support. It's extremely common. I'm self-deprecating at times, not to consciously get people to compliment me, but usually because I'm exaggerating my realism about how smart I think I am. Saying Black Lives Matter seems like something obvious that most people feel. Grammatically, Black Lives Matter almost sounds like a straw man. Some black people are killed and get no justice in America, therefore no black people matter? Well, obviously that's not true, but how do you prove that? How do any of us prove we really matter? Better question, how do any of us feel like we matter? If you kindly look out the windows on the right side of the car, you'll see the All Lives Matter hashtag that's often used in response to Black Lives Matter. It's been said that saying All Lives Matter is a way to silence black people. I want to disagree with that, but I understand where that's coming from. It does break communication and divert the topic of conversation. One person or one group is expressing something simple. We feel that we don't matter. Instead of others responding by saying, "Well, why do you feel that way?" Those others basically respond with, "Yeah, well, we feel like we don't matter too." That doesn't address the feeling of the first person or group that I'm citing, and that response, "we feel like we don't matter too," only further complicates things because, well, why do those white people feel like they don't matter? What are they taking for granted by not understanding someone else's struggles? It just gets competitive about who feels they don't matter most, or who gets to feel that way, or who is more right in feeling that way. Ultimately, people battle over semantic definitions, all the arguing diverts to aspects that aren't important, and hooray, everyone gets to keep fighting. Deja vu all over again. And while everyone competes to see who the biggest victim is, no one is getting any satisfaction because no one is empathizing with one another or helping each other, which is what everybody desperately needs to do most, to feel heard, to feel as if their pain matters enough to someone else to act on. Claiming all lives matter is a bit lofty in general though, don't you think? Especially considering some of the things most people want for certain other people. You mean to tell me every life matters? Every single one? Yeah? Remember Brock Turner, the white teen swimmer caught raping an unconscious girl at a party? That story sparked immense fervor online. Thousands of women outraged that Brock only got 3 months in a cushy facility. Many people wanted his head on a spike. It's doubtful people thought his life mattered. I've said this to a lot of people. Duration inside wasn't the issue for him. The issue should have been, where did he serve? My solution, you're going to love this. Put him in maximum security no longer than 1 month, but pull him out after an undisclosed amount of time. See, the people who got pissed that he only served 3 months, their argument is that the girl who was victimized will likely be fighting this trauma her whole life, and 3 months in basically summer school doesn't make up for what she's going through and or going to go through in adulthood. That's valid. So put him in max, where his poor little anus will live on the end of a giant criminal cock day after day, up until he gets sent home out of nowhere. Those cons better use him up and kill him quick, otherwise too bad. Much like Brock had to hurry and finish before his victim woke up, right? And I know, that sounds terrible. How dare I suggest doing something like that to a teen? Look, parenting is tough business. You're teaching another human being everything they need to know about life. Ever try teaching your adult friend how to change a flat tire, or fix a doorknob, or install a fucking app on their phone? These are simple things even with my limited life experiences that even I can do, and people who have trouble with this shit think they can pluck the answers to life's mysteries regarding morality, ethics, philosophy, politics, the creation of the universe, the hardest questions imaginable that even the greatest scholars and thinkers and scientists of our time have trouble solving. These things will somehow come easy when building a new human being. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't even thinking. Are you on Twitter? Did someone tweet at you hashtag meaning of life and give you a couple short sentences and a meme with a cat or Kermit the Frog or Velociraptor or Boromir about what life's all about? Well, that makes you wise enough to pass on what you know to an entire new generation. My humblest apologies. Life isn't all about teeth brushing, shoe tying, multiplication tables, ABCs, and sing-alongs. Kids grow out of that shit at light fucking speed. Yes, as in the speed it takes to physically fuck light itself. That's how fast they grow out of that little kid shit. Beauty part is, I can say this without a single kid of my own. There's a ton at stake when you bring a person into the world. What children do when they grow up directly relies on how you've taught them to deal with the world around them as they develop. And yet you can teach them everything and do all the right things, and there's still no way of telling who they'll get in trouble with or what kind of bad mistakes they'll make where they'll shape them into entirely different people. But expecting people to try harder with their children and citing a potential month stay in max with hardcore adult criminals, that's some serious consequence. You want to do anything possible to keep your kid out of there, don't you? And what would it take? Teaching your little boys to respect women a little more? Enforcing in them that it isn't okay to touch them in certain ways or even say certain things to them? Explain to me how that's too much to ask. When young people like 18-year-old Michael Brown are shot 6 times, there's no deciding what else can be done. He's just dead. Justice has, I guess, been served. Brock Turner rapes a girl, and there's discussion about what to do with him. There's a thought that he has a life ahead of him, an implication that he can correct what he's done to make himself better. And even though I suggested something pretty harsh about Brock earlier, it's just an idea. And I know my idea will never happen, and if it did, it would never work out as perfectly as I want it to. It should be the consequence we all fear, but it wouldn't work. Darren Wilson was a cop. He's in an altercation with Michael Brown. Wilson gets the blessing from most of America to inflict any justice he sees fit on a teenager? Why? Because someone deemed him worthy of wearing a badge and a blue uniform? The story is that Brown robbed a convenience store, he attacked Officer Wilson and tried to take Wilson's gun. I'm confused how Wilson allowed any of that to even be a danger. How he allowed Brown to get close enough for him to reach for his gun, and even when he got close, why Wilson didn't use some degree of close quarters techniques to subdue Brown before his hand even reached for the gun in the first place. I'm waiting for the part that unquestionably shows a teenager deserves to be shot 6 times. We never hear about white kids physically fighting with cops. We hear even less about white kids physically fighting with the cops and getting their heads blown off like Michael Brown did. If it ever happens that a white kid fights with a cop, those white kids are safe. Most white families with rambunctious, troublesome kids would expect those kids brought home, whether in cuffs or out of them, but ultimately safe and sound. They would expect the officer to use, quote, good judgment and, quote, act responsibly around a teenager. Darren Wilson didn't use good judgment or act responsibly. He fired 12 times, 6 bullets hit, 2 landed in Brown's head. And that disparity is a huge part of why many people who wave the Black Lives Matter banner feel not just slighted, but extremely pissed off. The type of privilege it takes to expect your kid who just attacked a cop to be brought straight home to mommy and daddy and not to the police station isn't the type of privilege a single soul should have. But seeing people who look like you get bullets put into them for similar, if not lesser, crimes than people who don't look like you, it's easy to see why black people would feel like they don't matter as a result. Another hashtag that mostly white people brought forward to counteract Black Lives Matter in addition to All Lives Matter is, of course, Blue Lives Matter. A hashtag dedicated to police officers that have lost their lives, mostly killed either in the line of duty or when off duty. At first, I was really okay with Blue Lives Matter. At first, it was highlighted with the simplest possible logo, a little black box with a blue line in it. No problem, easy to understand, recognizable. Okay, over time, it's gotten stepped up and pushed even further. Towns filling in double yellow lines on the road with blue, okay, no big deal. But Google Blue Lives Matter imagery and click on images to see how far this is going. Apparently, there's a new version of the American flag for this. Same basic shape and layout, but instead of being typical red, white, and blue, it's completely black, no red stripes, no blue field for the stars, just horizontal white stripes, white stars, and a blue horizontal line down the center. I think the scariest one I've seen most recently is that black, white, and blue version of the American flag emblazoned over the skull logo for the comic book character The Punisher. Like I said, at first it was a simple symbol to honor men and women who died serving on the force. Most people with a basic level of sensitivity can respect that, I certainly do, but a new American flag over the symbol of a comic book character known for being a violent vigilante who hunts and kills criminals? At what point is Blue Lives Matter no longer an honor for dead cops, but a hollow way for people to fight back or intimidate others? And who is being fought to seek justice for the death of the cops? I get that some white people feel some grammatical jab is being taken at them when they see the Black Lives Matter hashtag, and I'm not personally offended by the Punisher character. Frank Castle is pretty cool in the comics, and I understand the intention of creating him as an anti-hero who hunts down criminals who themselves are mostly murderers. But this is real life. Real people die at the hands of law enforcement sometimes, and the assumption from mostly white people, but also a few black people, is that all law enforcement has made good decisions and citizens feel like not only not respecting those families of people who have died, but displaying a new flag. I'm not exactly a betting man, at least I'm not notorious for it, but what do you think the odds are that if you were to question the owner of a vehicle with a black, white, and blue flag on their car, you asked them, what do you think about the football players kneeling during the national anthem to protest racial injustice and police brutality? That they go, well, I think it's amazing. Those players should be commended for their expression of free speech. Going out on a limb here, odds are low as fuck. How about if you share on social media a body cam video of a cop shooting a black person, like the newest one that came out a few days ago, of Patrick Harmon, 50 years old, who was stopped for not having a rear tail light on his bicycle. He was discovered to have a warrant for aggravated assault, and when he tried to run away before being cuffed, one cop used a taser, great idea, but the other shot him dead. You share a video of that on social media, what are the odds conservatives that you know are going to respond with, he had a weapon on him, he attacked him, he was trying to run, I really can't see what's going on in the middle of the video there, going out on another limb here, guessing the odds for that are high. I linked the story in the description, feel free to give it a look for yourself. Yes, I do respect and fear cops, I said it before, and I'll repeat it, because if I don't, people will magically forget. I respect and fear cops. I'm saddened and afraid when they're killed, just like many other people are. Officers who are brave enough to lay their lives on the line every single day and are then killed do deserve respect and time paid to their lives, their service, and their good deeds, unquestionably. But to only focus on those deaths and say how those are the unjust ones, and not put any focus at all on citizens killed by bad cops, irresponsible cops, cops who in some cases aren't trained well enough to deal with certain scenarios, in some cases like George Zimmerman, not even cops, seems really lopsided against black people. Now, while I will completely agree that these things are valid reasons for people to be pissed off enough to start a movement called Black Lives Matter, BLM is occasionally attached to smaller, potentially easier to solve issues like microaggressions and language and assumptions about white people that sometimes aren't true and aren't deserved, that can, in my opinion, water down the cause as a whole and inspire anger that isn't necessary. A couple years ago, an article was written for Huffington Post entitled Microaggressions in the Workplace, Black Lives Matter, and Politically Correct Speech, in which the author, Con Ho, shares an anecdote about how he was working at a college and had dinner with a group of people, one of whom was a distinguished poet who was blind. At this dinner, the poet told the story about how he'd kill Yoko Ono, which made the author of this article very uncomfortable. I'm guessing Khan mentioned the fact that the poet was blind to suggest that if he could see Khan was Asian, he would have maybe not made the joke. It's possible. Does Khan being Asian affect how good or bad a person Yoko Ono is? I don't think so, but anyway. Khan in the anecdote excused himself to go to the bathroom and explained in the article how people of color can't express themselves the way the NPR set can. Quote, there is a paranoia that sets in when confronted with a microaggression. You see, for people of color, the way one reacts to racism is tricky. We often do not have the privilege to call people out, not in the same way that a self-righteous NPR listener can step up and say, step off, you have crossed the line. The only time a person of color can truly tell someone off is when she has nothing left to lose, like the protesters in the Black Lives Matter movement who can lie down on the streets or break windows, unquote. Look, it doesn't take privilege to speak out. It takes two things. It takes the guts to open your mouth, and it takes a smart enough judgment to know when that's a good time and when it's not. In the case with this dinner with the poet, Khan was working there, and perhaps shouldn't make people upset who may have the power to fire him. I'm a white guy. There's probably been a bunch of times I wanted to joke with a white supervisor or superior or tell them that I took offense to something they said, and I didn't say anything for fear of reprisal. That's not racial in any way. That's respecting the hierarchy of the job. Is that to say superiors and supervisors are allowed to say anything they want? I don't know. Should they suffer mutiny for making rude comments? Maybe when they're too vulgar or stacked up enough. There are times when employees think a superior is being, quote, rude and all they were told to do is hurry up and finish their work on time. All I know is I'm sure some people think one simple comment is enough to lose a job over, and I have a hard time seeing that as okay, even if it's somewhat offensive. Another anecdote Khan told in the article, which is a bit of a reverse look at a similar situation, was of a black friend of his who was an executive at a nonprofit organization. This black friend, she was mistaken for a secretary numerous times by an intern. Nowhere in the article does he mention that his friend said to the intern, hey, I'm actually an executive, I'm not a secretary, giving the intern a chance to correct what they said, apologize, change their tone, whatever. The assumption is, this is a racist society, and therefore, even when you're an executive, a white intern has power over you and can say whatever they want. That is fundamentally untrue. When you have power, Use it. The whole point of anyone working to get to that high position to be an executive may not be to throw your shit around willy-nilly or act like royalty, but when a dispensable intern is disrespectful, take charge. Do the professional thing and correct them. It's not bitchy or mean or inappropriate to take them aside and say, listen, I'm not a secretary, I'm an executive. Hell, the fact that Khan mentioned it twice in his account of his friend's story clearly shows that his friend got pissed, walked away, probably tweeted about it, and left it by the wayside, which is exactly what you shouldn't do. And Khan tries to justify not saying anything by pushing this narrative of being oppressed by implying the intern, quote, knows their station is a position of privilege of never fearing getting killed by police and also not being mistaken for a lackey, unquote. This instance isn't a conspiracy. He wasn't going home and dunking his dick into a white privilege sheet cake and orgasming about not fearing police brutality. They were being a fucking jerk. When you're an executive and an intern is being a little shit, flush them down the toilet. Dumbass people make dumbass mistakes, and in some cases, sure, some of those dumbass people might spit in your face if you tell them what's what. If that happens, tell them to get the fuck out. Others, however, will realize their dumbass mistakes, straighten up, and fly right from then on. Some can learn. You want to march peacefully for justice when a member of your community is murdered by a cop who is found not guilty? I can't argue with that in any way. In fact, I want to join one or more of those peaceful marches at some point or another, believe that or don't. But when the authority is in your hands and you choose to hang your head and bumble away because Georgie Porgy is giving you a hard time, no, I'm going to argue with that. Black people have every right to feel pissed, angry, and fucking frustrated every time they hear about an unarmed black person getting killed in some extremely irresponsible move or overcompensation or, quote, self-defense from law enforcement, and see barely any justice brought against the perpetrator. But rising in a company to become an executive, then allowing an intern to talk down to you, and then thinking that it's some way that intern is expressing his station, that's a perfect example of you not embracing how much you actually do matter. That's you thinking you're still a victim at the bottom of the ladder when all someone did was say something. Something that's easily diffused with just some professional attitude, a question, a comment, takes 2 seconds. And if they act out and cause trouble because they were simply told to treat you with respect, there's the door, Tyler. Your attitude got you fired. In that case, that black woman had power, she had authority, and chose to not use it because her feelings were hurt. And then Khan writes this article and associates the story of his friend to Black Lives Matter. I understand associating it with police brutality, instances where black lives are physically being lost, treated like seaweed and algae that needs to be scraped off the bottom of the shiny passenger liner. That's a distinct way to show people they don't matter at all if their lives themselves aren't even being protected, especially by those sworn to protect them. But this story from Huffington Post, I don't think it depicts what Black Lives Matter should be standing for. So here's the twist. We have one group which stands for gaming journalism ethics at the core, but is most well known for being populated by loudmouth sexists who thought calling women cunts and whores was the best way to defend journalistic integrity. We have another group which stands for the rights black people have to not be murdered by police officers who then suffer next to no punishment or repercussions after the fact, but is mostly well known for pointing out every microaggression, comment, privilege, fragility, appropriation, and sliver of power that white people have in their arsenals to oppress, punch down, and flatten the rights of black people. Both of those things those two groups are well known for aren't really what those groups actually stand for. And the funniest part is, if you were to ask a member of either group, Gamergate or Black Lives Matter, how they feel about the other group, they'd likely tell you they hate them. You ask them why, they'd cite exactly the type of public image they're known for way sooner than they'll see that that other group has the exact same problem. Groups like these, Gamergate and Black Lives Matter, among many other hashtag movements and causes, I'm sure, up to and including the biggest groups in the country and the world, conservatives, liberals, Republicans, Democrats, whatever else, desperately need to closely monitor what types of sentiments are happening in their own groups. Self-regulating needs to occur much more frequently. When things get really extreme or unruly, people high up within those groups need to flush out the crazy random people, the people who are trying to take that cause over for themselves and redirect things back to a more reasonable public image and intention to keep it focused. I realize that plenty of Americans like the idea of starting their own causes and communities, especially when they rebel against common sentiments and hopefully change society's course. It's part of what I want to do with this channel. But too many hop on Twitter and, quote, get in on conversations, even though doing so on Twitter doesn't involve you in a conversation. It just gives you a bigger, brighter, higher profile platform to engage in sniping battles without much room to really delve into any issues at all. If you belong to a group or cause or hashtag movement that really gains traction and trends a lot, then you or someone else need to apply some public relations or monitoring to ensure that your hashtag isn't misappropriated or have its meaning changed by people who don't have the same intention as those who start it. Otherwise, the whole point of getting some hashtag trending or cause started up will be completely for naught. Keep well in mind, just because your hashtag or movement picks up steam, just because it's trending, just because it's getting retweets, doesn't mean it's all the type of attention you want it to have. There's the old saying, there's no such thing as bad publicity. The idea is that any attention paid to your brand, your company, your saying, your slogan, etc., even negative attention is good for you because people are talking about it, people are making it part of their daily routine, it's becoming recognizable, people are remembering it. On paper, that seems like a great thing. But when you do that in an online environment when so many people are eager to look down on another group or side or cause as part of the problem by diluting what it actually stands for. When so many people want to join up with that cause for reasons that don't mesh with what the cause actually stands for, then your hashtag or cause or movement needs to be monitored better to ensure that people who want to be in your group aren't misusing your hashtag for their own purposes, and instead your cause can continue to be focused on accomplishing the goals you set out to accomplish. This is Killer Cardinal DA7 reminding you to use your head, be nice to each other, and take the time to think. Talk to you later.
Remember, in this community, you're only as good as people think you are. No matter how good you actually are. It's a bit silly, all this peacocking and posturing.